December 17, 1944. A frozen morning at a checkpoint outside Iwela, Belgium. The jeep eased to a stop as the military policeman raised his hand. His breath fogged the air. 3 men sat inside in American uniforms that looked convincing. Regulation weapons, passable English. But Sergeant William Creel had been warned about something impossible. Germans operating behind Allied lines dressed as Americans. He asked for the password. The men hesitated. He asked again. Their English stumbled. Then Creel noticed the Sten guns, British weapons no American patrol would carry. Within minutes, the 3 were in custody. Beneath their olive drab, German field gray showed through. Unticia Manfred Perus, Oberfenrig Gunther Billing, and Gaeta Wilhelm Schmidt became among the most notorious prisoners taken during the Battle of the Bulge. What they didn't know was that their capture would trigger a wave of paranoia across the American forces, a methodical campaign of cultural interrogation that turned every checkpoint into a pop quiz, every casual conversation into a loyalty test, and every soldier into a possible spy. Detection wouldn't rely only on codes. It would use baseball stats, state capitals, and Hollywood gossip. The scheme began months earlier, on October 22, 1944, at Hitler's headquarters in Rastenburg, East Prussia. Adolf Hitler summoned SS operative Otto Skorzeny and laid out an audacious plan. Germany would launch a massive counteroffensive through the Ardennes toward the vital port of Antwerp, aiming to split American and British forces, recreating the shock of May 1940 when German panzers reached the Channel. Success depended on speed and on seizing at least one bridge over the Meuse River before Allied engineers could demolish it. Skorzeny was ordered to form a special force, Panzer Brigade 150, tasked with capturing those bridges intact. Hitler then proposed a controversial tactic: small units disguised in American and British uniforms to sow chaos, disrupt communications, mislead troops, and spread panic. Skorzeny immediately knew the legal danger. The Hague Convention forbade fighting in enemy uniforms. Captured soldiers wearing them could be treated as spies and face execution. The plan sparked heated talks with senior commanders, including General Alfred Jodl and Field Marshal von Rundstedt. Hitler insisted the ruse was acceptable if the men removed Allied uniforms before actual combat. Skorzeny submitted his plan and requested 300 men fluent in English and versed in American idioms. A call went out for English-speaking volunteers for secret commando operations, the order signed by Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel himself. Skorzeny feared the broadcast would be intercepted and even asked to cancel. Hitler refused. Allied intelligence did intercept the order on November 30th, but officers dismissed it as a trick. They couldn't imagine the Germans being so brazen. Volunteers arrived from all branches of the German armed forces, most unaware of the full scope of what they'd signed up for. Fritz Priest, a 21-year-old Luftwaffe private trained as an English translator, expected to interrogate American prisoners far from the front. Instead, he found himself isolated behind barbed wire at the training camp at Grafenwöhr in eastern Bavaria. Security was brutal. One man was shot after a letter home revealed too many details. The volunteers only learned their real mission after arrival, and what Skorzeny had to work with was almost comical given the stakes. Of roughly 2,500 men assembled, only about 10 spoke flawless English and understood American idioms. Another 30-40 spoke English well but didn't know American slang. A few managed only basic replies, barely able to say yes or no. Skorzeny later wrote that after a couple of weeks the situation was terrifying. Men with minimal English were coached to cry sorry, then fake a sudden case of diarrhea, drop their trousers and run, if confronted by Americans. Equipment shortages were just as dire. OB West was supposed to supply motorcycles, 120 trucks, and large numbers of British and American uniforms. The delivery was a catastrophe. Only 2 Sherman tanks appeared, both in poor shape. One broke down almost immediately. Instead of U.S. armor, Skorzeny received 5 Panther tanks, 6 armored cars, 6 personnel carriers, and 5 Sturmgeschütz assault guns, German vehicles disguised with sheet metal cladding, olive drab paint, and white stars. Skorzeny admitted they would only fool very young American troops, glimpsing them at night from a long distance. Uniforms were worse. Many were British, Polish, or captured Russian garments. Some were summer issue despite a December offensive. Others showed bloodstains or P markings. Units across Germany, confused by the strange request, sent whatever they could find, flooding the brigade with mismatched kit from forces that had no idea what the operation meant. Skorzeny managed to secure authentic American uniforms and weapons for only the commando teams. The best English speakers were grouped into a special unit called Einheit, led by SS Captain Ernstelo. Despite the compressed timetable, these teams trained intensively. American Army organization, rank insignia, customs, and drill. Some were sent to POW camps at Küstrin and Lindau to practice English with captured Americans. They watched American films to perfect accents and pick up current slang. They memorized brand names, sports teams, popular songs, and Hollywood stars. They practiced walking and smoking like Americans, down to chewing gum. Missions were split into 3 types. Demolition squads of 5 or 6 would destroy bridges, ammo dumps, and fuel stores. Recon patrols of 3 to 4 would scout both banks of the Meuse, hand out fake orders to American units, reverse road signs, remove mine warnings, and cordon roads with false notices about mines. Lead commando teams would operate with attacking German forces to cut phone lines, wreck radio stations, and issue bogus orders. The commandos understood the risks. Captured in U.S. uniforms, they faced near certain execution. They also risked friendly fire. German troops might shoot them by mistake. To reduce that danger, they used identification signals. Vehicles displayed a small yellow triangle, tanks held specific gun positions, and soldiers wore colored scarves under their uniforms. On December 14th, Panzer Brigade 150 assembled near Bad Münstereifel. On the afternoon of December 16th, they moved out, following 3 attacking panzer divisions. The plan called for Skorzeny's disguised units to slip around the spearhead divisions once they reached the main line, then race ahead to seize Meuse bridges intact. Everything depended on the rapid breakthrough of the 1st SS Panzer Division under its commander. If that armored spearhead punched through quickly, Skorzeny's disguised troops could slip in behind it, and confusion reigned as the Germans pushed to reach the bridges before American engineers could destroy them. December 16, 1944 began before dawn. Through the dark forests of the Ardennes, more than 200,000 German troops launched Hitler's final major offensive in the West. The first strikes caught the Allies completely off guard. American forces, stretched thin along an 80-mile front, suddenly faced overwhelming strength. 4 understrength or exhausted divisions stood against 30 German divisions backed by nearly 1,000 tanks. A thunderous artillery barrage shattered the frozen stillness, while searchlights bounced off low clouds, turning the snow into a pale, ghostly glow. Infantry poured through the woods as panzers rumbled forward along narrow roads. At first, everything went according to plan. The Einheit commandos infiltrated behind enemy lines amid the confusion, dressed in American uniforms, driving captured jeeps. They moved effortlessly through the chaos of retreating Allied units. One team drove straight into an American-held town, surveyed the defenses, and on the way out sent a U.S. convoy full of tanks and supplies down the wrong road. 2 other teams also misdirected Allied traffic, spreading more confusion. Others cut phone lines, tore down road signs, and spread false reports of German breakthroughs deeper than they really were. But by December 17th, the operation began to unravel. The 1st SS Panzer Division failed to reach its objectives on time. American forces at Elsenborn Ridge fought with unexpected ferocity, blocking the crucial northern routes. At St. Vith, U.S. troops held out for nearly a week, wrecking the German timetable. The rapid advance Operation Greif relied on simply didn't happen. Realizing this, Skorzeny knew his mission had collapsed. That same day, he attended a staff meeting at the 6th Panzer Army headquarters and proposed turning his unit into a conventional combat force. The order was approved. Panzer Brigade 150 was told to regroup south of Malmedy and report to the 1st SS Panzer Division, but many of Skorzeny's commando teams were already deep behind American lines. Some succeeded. Others were captured when they failed password checks. When jittery American soldiers noticed British-made guns or German boots when their accents slipped, or when they couldn't answer simple questions about U.S. life. The capture near Iwela on December 17th of Perus, Billing, and Schmidt set off the panic that defined the mission's legacy. During interrogation, Schmidt made a claim that electrified Allied intelligence. He said their real goal was to infiltrate Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force and assassinate General Dwight D. Eisenhower himself. Whether Schmidt truly believed this or was spreading disinformation remains unclear. No proof of such a plan has ever surfaced. In reality, their objective was to capture bridges across the Meuse River. Still, the damage was done. Within hours, security around Eisenhower tightened dramatically. The Supreme Commander was virtually locked inside his Versailles headquarters, surrounded by heavily armed guards checking every visitor. Eisenhower reportedly grew furious at being confined, especially when it continued through Christmas. After several days, he exploded, insisting he had to get out and didn't care if anyone tried to kill him. But the paranoia didn't stop there. Across the Allied rear areas, checkpoints multiplied, slowing the movement of men and supplies to a crawl. Military police began grilling every passing soldier with improvised American identity tests. The questions ranged from the capital of Illinois to the 1940 World Series winner, from Mickey Mouse's girlfriend to who sang with Frank Sinatra. MPs quizzed troops about baseball teams, state geography, Hollywood stars, and slang. Anything to expose imposters. The result was chaos. Even genuine American soldiers often failed the tests. Regional differences quickly made the American identity tests a mess. Soldiers from one part of the country often knew nothing about the other. Texans didn't know Midwestern trivia, and men from New York rarely followed baseball. Educational gaps made things worse. Some troops had never learned state capitals or cared about sports. The checkpoints turned into chaos. General Omar Bradley himself was detained when he correctly said the capital of Illinois was Springfield. The MP was certain it was Chicago and held him until someone confirmed his identity. Brigadier General Bruce Clark was held at gunpoint after claiming the Chicago Cubs played in the American League. One captain spent a week in detention because he was wearing German boots he'd taken as souvenirs. British troops fared even worse. When reconnaissance officer David Nunn was asked who won the 1940 World Series, he replied honestly that he hadn't the faintest idea. Dozens of British soldiers failed similar questions about American sports or geography and were held until their identities could be verified by other means. Some Americans, frustrated with the absurd questions, gave deliberately wrong answers and got arrested for it. Others grew angry at being challenged by low-ranking MPs, sparking confrontations that slowed troop movements even more. The paranoia crippled operations. Journeys that should have taken hours stretched into days as every vehicle was stopped and every passenger interrogated. Supply convoys sat stalled while drivers tried to prove they were American. Reinforcements bound for critical sectors were delayed by endless questioning. Even officers had their orders second-guessed by subordinates suspicious of infiltrators. Meanwhile, the German commandos trapped behind Allied lines were paralyzed. The cultural questions had exposed the limits of their training. They'd memorized ranks, procedures, and slang, but hadn't studied baseball stats, movie stars, or regional quirks. Some tried to sneak cross-country through forests to avoid checkpoints, but that only made them stand out. Others attempted to bluff their way through, offering excuses for their ignorance, but few succeeded. Between December 16th and December 31st, American troops captured 23 members of Operation Greif. 16 of them were caught before the end of 1944. Team leader Günther Schultz was captured months later and put on trial in May 1945. Each captured infiltrator faced court-martial under international law. Article 23 of the Hague Convention explicitly forbade wearing enemy uniforms during combat operations. Those caught doing so could be treated as spies, not prisoners of war. The first trial took place at WWII, Belgium, on December 21st. Perouse, Billing, and Schmidt were charged with violating the laws of war. Captured in American uniforms with U.S. weapons and IDs but wearing German field gray underneath. The verdict was swift, guilty on all counts. All three were sentenced to death by firing squad. On December 23, 1944, just 2 days before Christmas, the executions were carried out. The three men were led to a clearing by American MPs. A medical officer pinned white paper targets over their hearts. Schmidt's glasses were removed. The men were blindfolded. As the firing squad took aim, Billing shouted, "Long live our Führer, Adolf Hitler!" A moment later, rifles cracked and all three died instantly. Their bodies were buried later at the Lommel German Military Cemetery in Belgium, alongside more than 39,000 other war dead. Between December 21 and 31, more executions followed. Wilhelm Wiesenfeld, Manfred Brony, Hans Reich, Arno Kroger, Günther Schulz, Eckhard Miegel, Horst Gehrig, Norbert Pollack, Ralph Benjamin Meer, Hans Witzuk, Otto Auer, Alfred Franz, and Anton Moruk all shot after brief trials. Each verdict was reviewed and confirmed by senior commanders. The sentences were carried out with precision, without cruelty but without mercy. Schultz the last was executed near Braunschweig on June 14, 1945, after Germany's surrender. Why his trial was delayed remains unclear, as does who ultimately approved the execution. In the end, Operation Greif achieved almost nothing tactically. No bridges were seized. No major demolitions succeeded. Only a few road signs were switched, some phone lines cut, and a handful of units briefly misdirected. Yet its psychological impact was enormous. For weeks, American soldiers believed German infiltrators could be anywhere. Suspicion spread through every level of command. Eisenhower's confinement cut him off from direct awareness of frontline conditions during the crucial early days of the battle. Checkpoint delays slowed the Allied response to the German advance. Units that should have reached the front in hours often took days. The fear of spies eroded trust and unity. Men who should have been fighting the Germans ahead of them began looking for Germans among themselves. The Battle of the Bulge itself raged on, largely unaffected by Operation Greif's failure. German forces drove deep into Allied lines, creating the bulge that gave the battle its name. At Bastogne, American troops of the 101st Airborne Division refused to surrender even when surrounded. When the Germans demanded their capitulation on December 22, Acting Commander Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe famously replied with one word, "nuts," which his staff later explained to the puzzled. Germans meant go to hell. The 101st held out until Patton's Third Army broke the siege on December 26 after a stunning 90-degree pivot north. By early January, Allied counterattacks erased the bulge and restored the front. The battle, fought from December 16, 1944, to January 25, 1945, involved more than 1 million troops, the largest fought by the U.S. Army since the Civil War. American casualties topped 80,000, including about 19,000 dead. It marked the end of Germany's ability to launch major offensives in the West. For Otto Skorzeny, Operation Greif effectively ended on December 17th, when Panzer Brigade 150 was converted into a conventional combat unit. On December 21st, his men tried to capture Malmedy but were repelled after repeated attacks. Skorzeny himself was wounded by artillery near Ligneville, but recovered and served until Germany's surrender. In 1947, Skorzeny and 9 of his officers were tried at the Dachau trials for illegally wearing American uniforms and engaging in combat while disguised. They were also accused of stealing American uniforms and Red Cross parcels from POW camps. Skorzeny's defense relied on one critical point. His men were told to remove the U.S. uniforms before entering combat. The disguises were meant only for infiltration and deception, not fighting. A surprise defense witness turned the case. FFE Yo Thomas, a former British Special Operations executive agent, testified that Allied forces had used similar tactics. He himself had worn German uniforms behind enemy lines during missions in France. The tribunal made a clear distinction between wearing enemy uniforms for deception and using them in actual combat. Since there was no proof Skorzeny had ordered his men to fight while disguised, the court acquitted all the defendants. The verdict was controversial. 17 of Skorzeny's men had already been executed for the same acts he was cleared of. The difference came down to timing and evidence. The men captured in 1944 had been caught in American uniforms, while Skorzeny could prove he ordered his troops to remove them before combat. The ruling set an important precedent for the laws of war. Using enemy uniforms for deception was deemed a legitimate trick, a ruse de guerre, as long as the disguises were removed before battle. This interpretation would influence international law for decades. Skorzeny didn't stay imprisoned for long. In 1948, he escaped from an internment camp in Darmstadt with help from former SS officers posing as American MPs. Some historians believe U.S. intelligence may have quietly allowed it, though no proof exists. He hid on a Bavarian farm, then in Salzburg and Paris before settling in Spain. There he worked as a military advisor to Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser. Skorzeny died of cancer in Madrid on July 5, 1975, at age 67. Never expressing regret for Operation Greif or any other wartime actions. The bizarre checkpoint interrogations became part of American military legend. Questions about baseball, Hollywood, and state capitals became symbols of how American culture itself became a weapon during the crisis. The improvised system, though chaotic, worked. It exposed infiltrators who could speak English and wear U.S. uniforms, but couldn't fake the easy, lived cultural knowledge Americans grew up with. Being American wasn't just about language or appearance. It was about shared experiences and familiar references that couldn't be taught in weeks of training. This deep-rooted cultural identity, often taken for granted, became a hidden strength of national defense. The 17 men executed for Operation Greif are remembered today mainly through military cemeteries and historical records. Their graves at Lommel, Belgium are tended with the same care as those of soldiers killed in battle. The cemetery makes no distinction between spies and frontline troops. All are honored as German war dead. Manfred Perus died shouting loyalty to Hitler. Wilhelm Schmidt, just 24, faced his death calmly. Each had been someone's son or brother, their choices leading them to that frozen Belgian morning, to the blindfolds, the posts, and the rifles. Operation Greif's legacy went far beyond its battlefield failure. It proved that special operations alone can't replace success in conventional warfare. Skorzeny's infiltrators couldn't take bridges if the German panzers never arrived. No amount of deception could make up for the failed offensive. Still, the operation achieved something its planners never expected. It created massive disruption. The fear of German infiltrators threw the U.S. Army into days of confusion and paranoia. That gap between perception and reality became an enduring lesson in psychological warfare. By late January 1945, the Battle of the Bulge had ended. The Allies pushed forward into Germany, and within 4 months the Third Reich collapsed. Hitler committed suicide in his Berlin bunker. Germany surrendered unconditionally on May 8, 1945. The 17 executed infiltrators lay buried in Belgium, their war long over. Their mission had failed tactically, but succeeded in one respect. It sowed confusion and fear during one of the most critical moments of the war. In Parliament on January 18, 1945, while fighting still raged, Winston Churchill called it undoubtedly the greatest American battle of the war, and said it would forever stand as a legendary U.S. victory. The checkpoint guards who asked about baseball or Hollywood didn't know they were writing military folklore. They were simply solving a problem, finding a way to identify enemies. Their method worked because it drew on something real and unteachable, shared American culture. Germans could memorize facts, but they couldn't fake that natural fluency, the kind you get from growing up American. This difference between learned knowledge and lived experience proved decisive. Operation Greif's outcome taught a timeless truth. Cultural understanding cannot be faked or rushed. Even today, intelligence agencies spend years preparing undercover agents because true cultural fluency takes immersion and time. Language, facts, and behavior can be taught, but genuine belonging cannot. Operation Greif showed both the promise and the limits of special operations. Small, unconventional units can cause chaos far beyond their size, but no deception, however clever, can win a war on its own. But without the support of conventional military success, special operations alone can't win wars. Deception may create confusion, but it can't replace victory. For historians and military strategists, Operation Greif remains a fascinating case study, an example of how bold plans, when detached from realistic capabilities, are doomed to fail. Hitler's late war decision-making followed this same pattern. Grand ideas, short on resources, and disconnected from battlefield reality. Still, the operation's unintended success in spreading panic proved that deception and psychological warfare can act as powerful force multipliers. The 17 men executed for wearing enemy uniforms might have been forgotten if not for history's record. They weren't influential figures. Their mission achieved almost nothing before collapsing. Yet their deaths marked an important moment in military and legal history, clarifying how international law applies to combatants using enemy disguises. Their legacy survives in the lessons learned from their failure. Identity verification remains vital for security. Cultural knowledge is still something that can't be faked overnight. Special operations continue to play a valuable role, but they can never replace the need for conventional success. And the laws of war, while essential, are always interpreted through the lens of circumstance and evidence. The human cost of war extends beyond the battlefield. It includes those executed after capture, judged and condemned under wartime law. Each of the men buried at Lommel was a person with a past, a family, and a life cut short by the brutal logic of conflict. Even the American guards who carried out those executions bore emotional scars. Soldiers following orders but forced to face the moral weight of their duty. Operation Greif didn't seize bridges or cause major destruction. It killed few Americans directly, yet the fear it generated slowed reinforcements, disrupted decision-making, and drained resources during critical moments. Its true impact lay not in physical damage but in the psychological chaos it unleashed. The rapid capture, trial, and execution of infiltrators showed American military justice under the intense pressure of war. The speed of those proceedings reflected battlefield urgency, a stark contrast to the slower, more deliberate standards that would be expected today. The Battle of the Bulge raged on for 5 more weeks after the infiltrators were executed, ending in a decisive German defeat and the destruction of Germany's last strategic reserve. The story of Operation Greif, and the Battle of the Bulge as a whole, reminds us that war isn't fought only with bullets and tanks. Its outcome is also shaped by fear, morale, and perception. A failed mission that spreads panic can sometimes cause more disruption than a successful one that remains unseen. The checkpoint interrogations, absurd as they seemed, worked because they tested something no spy could fake: the natural, instinctive knowledge of an American's own culture. The soldiers who fought in the frozen forests of Belgium faced not only a fierce enemy offensive, but the constant fear that anyone around them could be an imposter. That paranoia, that erosion of certainty, introduced a new psychological dimension to modern warfare, one that would influence how armies handle security, intelligence, and trust for generations to come.